après vous avoir dit
So
quel point on
after
arrivait à
telling
maîtriser
you
le côté technique de ces travaux,
how we
à
managed
quel
to
point on arrivait à
have a good command
prévoir
of the technical
les
aspect of
hypothèses
these
scientifiques
works,
de
how we
suivi de ces
managed to
travaux.
anticipate the
Il y a
scientific
un point
monitoring
beaucoup moins
of these works. There's something that's a lot more difficult to anticipate. That's the human factor, and that's what a little bit scary sometimes with the projects and in our work, because even if we are convinced as technicians that's what we need to manage and to accompany with our decision makers, and as far as I'm concerned, it means the elected representatives. So in France we're lucky that we have water agencies, and in 2018 I was involved in a water agency project. It was a simple question but extremely important.
On a fait ces dernières années, donc là on est en 2018.
So it was in 2018, were the restoration projects performed in 2000 and 2010, even if they have been first designed from a technical perspective, did they have a social usefulness as well? So basically, these restoration works are the only ecological projects, but also land development project. So as far as these works were performed in the years 2000, so in our area, we fitted in that project, and I managed to work with a design office or a study office specializing in sociology. And that's when the SMIRIL considered writing a new management plan in order not to only integrate ecological stakes but also sociological stakes. And in 2018, this gave me the opportunity to interview associations, to meet local inhabitants, and to draw a first map of the site perception for local inhabitants. Why do I come and walk here? How do I feel? What can I find? What's my activity? Simultaneously, there was the possibility to move a company on the island. So basically that project consisted in removing trees over 20 hectares. Fortunately it didn't happen, but the effect that was that associations and local inhabitants mobilized in order to prevent this from happening. Basically the students said 20 years ago, we said we had to protect that space, and there you are talking about removing trees over 20 hectares. So that was a positive thing. And basically the SMIRIL talked together with the elected representatives, and we thought that it was a great restoration project. But we also thought that it was important to include the feeling of local inhabitants and the way they perceive the sites. And we know now that every time we touch upon the forest or the natural environment, this triggers reactions on their side. So basically the question was, how about we don't work on that project from a pure technical perspective, but we also moderate a consultation project in order to take local communities into account as part of the project. So basically this is what happened, and just a short diagram. At that time we thought that this approach would be useful not only for CNR as part of the restoration project, but also for the region, because they also wanted to develop a bicycle lane in this area. So a project holder accepted this approach of associating local inhabitants, and today we're there. The works will start in January. And if you look at the region project, that of a bicycle lane, they had a different approach, and it was basically declined by the local population and it was given up. So it's just to show you how important it is to have such approaches. As part of that context, we are coming with our big works project from a technical and time perspective And basically we can feel a sensitivity of the territory stakeholders with respect to the preservation stakes and how we're going to transform this natural environment. Simultaneously, and from an engineering and methodological perspective, we were asking ourselves questions, because we understood that there were three major aspects in this restoration work. First, we needed to make major wood clearance, so trees is a symbol of the landscape, especially when you're close to such a big agglomeration. So it symbolizes climate change, so it's really like a kind of totem in this consultation approach. And we came here with our image, like we want to restore the Rhône River and we want to do ecological restoration, but we start by removing 80 years old trees, so that was a bit complicated. Second point, to remove the Girardon systems, after cutting the trees, you have to look for building machines. So basically it means these are big works, highly impactful, that don't have a very purely ecological image. It's a carbon footprint, creating access roads. It's a lot of transportation, truckloads, and so on and so forth. So not very good for the image. And the third thing is the sediment reinjection, sediment backfill. So how does it happen? Well, how do you put gravels back in the Rhône River? Basically, you create access roads and you take truckloads close to the river, and they just dump the gravels in the river. And if you don't explain that, people will think, but what are they playing at? They're just throwing stones in the river. So that's why we had a technical approach, but we also wanted to legitimate our operations. How can we convince people that this is the right way to do? So this is going to have to go through complex steps, but help them understand that it's for a restoration purpose. As Damien was saying, we work together with a sociological firm, consultancy. So back to this collaboration with the sociology consultancy. As engineers, they brought us new project building methods. Just to make it short, you have engineers, you have a problem, one solution. They've got entry data, and before they design the backwaters or the oxbow, whatever, they study the water quality, the height of sediments, the depth of the water, groundwater, and so on and so forth. This firm told us there's something else you need to include and to take into account in your technical approach. That's the perception, the social utility, and the perception that local inhabitants and the site users have. This is an input data that should be used from the very beginning of the project design. So basically, these led us to compromises. So if you remember that former Rhône that was full of concrete, it looked as a kind of heritage. It has a particular name. It was well known by the local inhabitants and the previous generations. And there was a kind of request not to destroy that piece of work. And then Johan suggested a technical adaptation. Basically, it was not to dismantle everything in order to maintain some trees that were considered as iconic or ecological or whatever. So that was really important in the project method. Was to move step by step. We did that with 2 working groups. As you can see on the picture, we separated the local users of the site and their expertise, basically their knowledge, the activities they perform on that site. And there was a second parallel group, but they were not mixed for knowledge level issues. Basically, the environment stakeholders were in that second group who brought their expertise in the field of biodiversity, project quality, biological stakes, and so on and so forth. And simultaneously, we moved forwards simultaneously with those 2 groups, and there were steps, and we organized field visits. And that was really a co-construction of the technical project that was inspired by those workshops. So, and in the middle, this was under validation of decision makers, local elected representatives, and the water agency. So there was a steering committee that was built and that would validate each and every step. That's clearly at the beginning of the project, because the last box that you can see on that sheet is what we call the pre-project, the preliminary project. So that's before the building phase. That's just the technical definition with the plans, the measurements, the figures, and behind that you still have quite a number of steps before you go to realization. The approach is interesting for many reasons. First, it enabled to answer the question because we wanted these restoration projects to fit with the territory over the long terms, and clearly associating local inhabitants in the project definition from the very beginning, that might seem obvious, but that was not the case not so long ago, and that was a very good start. Why? Because everyone, depending on their sensitivity, their technical knowledge, or their business, or their job, everyone had a different vision of things. And as project holder, if you use like the classical way of bilateral explanation, there with elected representatives, there with hunters, and there with bike drivers, every time it's the project holder against another stakeholder. Although when building a varied group of various types of stakeholders, so that people can talk to each other and understand the points of views of the others. In that case, it's not someone against the project holder, but it's a group of inhabitants of some area trying to understand the topic and to figure out themselves with respect to the various perceptions. So basically we transformed that piece of work into a standing user committee regarding the site life, and for the first time in my life I saw a walker fighting for hunters, defending hunters, which is completely surprising in France. Usually hunting is not very well perceived by people walking, like walkers or hikers. So to me it's a good example that consultation approaches enable people to understand each other and points of views to be expressed and understood. So it's just about listening to everyone. Second, interest for the project holder is to bear the responsibility on our shoulder only. That was very interesting in that approach. Johan was kind enough to say, well, okay, we might change this or that in the technical project. We're not going to cut those trees. Okay, fair enough, even if we lose a little bit of the technical part of the project. So basically we started from a blank page and it was a co-construction. What was very interesting was intellectual honesty, really starting with a blank page, and very often in the phase of the public consultation the project is already almost completely designed or defined, and there's very little place for comments, for going backwards or accepting things or saying, okay, we didn't think about that, let's integrate this. Usually it's too late. Regulatory paperwork is done, and that's clearly what I remember from that project. Finally, what I also found very interesting is that in 2022 we ended that consultation phase with a last co-construction workshop, saying tomorrow in 2028, after the works, what will the site look like? And obviously this discussion approach let fears emerge. So some said, I'm going to lose walking pathways where I usually go walking with my family, or you're going to cut those trees, which I like, even if I understand that it's interesting for fish species and so on and so forth. So there was really a moral and ethical commitment that we would define together what the site would look like tomorrow. So today we have a plan or an idea of what the future walking pathways will look like. We've already discussed the fact that we're going to lose access at one part of the site. How can we recreate another access to another part of the site? So we are going to probably to install a little system to let people cross the water, drawing on a chain. We are going to recreate islands as well, because this is the historical landscape, and all this was defined as part of that co-construction process. And before I give over to you, I think it also enabled the client, the project owner, to anticipate reactions to issues well ahead of the regulatory process and the public study or public survey phase.